All right. Well, so moving on with the next question for our panelists. So we've been talking about criminal justice reform, which I feel like is a broad umbrella that can cover lots of issues, everything from pretrial, cash bail, excessive sentencing, mandatory minimums, a whole host of issues. I think are covered under the umbrella of criminal justice. I'll ask each of you, what kind of sticks out to you as an immediate need, and how would you like to see that issue resolved? And I'll start with you, Dr. Witherspoon.
Need justice, just simply put. The immediate need is to end mass incarceration by way of mandatory minimums and excessive sentencing. And you said it's broad, right? And so because it's broad, that immediate need has to be justice. I'm sorry, just across the board, because one feeds the other. And if we start trying to categorize or anything, right? What we're dealing with here with the systemic injustice, right? And when something is systemic, it's like you're getting caught up in a web. So the immediate need is for justice, and it has to be comprehensive for me to even focus on one area would actually do this conversation injustice, in my opinion. We have to completely dismantle the corrupt system, what we're dealing with in terms of immoral issues surrounding criminal justice is systemic, and we can't forget that.
What's your response to that, Marissa? Is there anything that you would see like as an immediate need that we should be focusing on, or do you have a similar view to Dr. Witherspoon?
No, I actually don't. Obviously it took us a while to get here, so it's going to take us a while to get out of it. But for an immediate need, one of the things I think we could do across the board is end cash money bail. There's a lot of people that's sitting incarcerated for bonds they can't afford. And so you get somebody sitting behind jail for maybe a $100, $400 bond when they actually had a job and a place. So now they're sitting there because they can't afford that. Now they lose their house, or their housing, and then lose their job. And that's just a ripple effect. So one of the things that can be done for me as of right now would be that. The other thing that I think would be helpful is, what was it? Personally, I think the governors have a lot of power with the strike of a pen to actually do grant clemency. Yeah. There's a lot of people. I think it's I don't know if it was in Mississippi or somewhere in New Orleans where somebody for stealing hedges got a 45-year life sentence.
Yeah, Louisiana.
Come on, Louisiana.
Right. So these are things that we can look at that, because I know that, that there can be, that information could be abstracted and be like, hey, listen, this person has been serving this sentence for this long. Go ahead and write your pen and let these people out. Those are just immediate things I think that can hit the back end of people who've been sitting there forever for just crazy sentences for things that don't make sense. And also that could help in terms of returning that money back to actually rehabilitating or putting it into something more that makes more sense. And then just the cash money bail. What do they do with that money? Because all it really is for is to make sure you come to court.
Right.
You know what I mean? I just think that's one of the things that is really tripping a lot of people up. And when you look at the numbers, there's a lot of people in pretrial, just as much, if not more, than the people that are actually sentenced and incarcerated. So that's just one of the things that we could start. Another thing would be decriminalizing marijuana. You know what I mean? These are that's real simple too. I think those are some of the places that I would start if I was to say an immediate need. And then in terms of just kind of relieving people and getting people out and maybe helping people not be penalized for not being able to afford bonds, I would start with those three things. And then, like I said, I guess Dr. mentioned, those other things will come into place. But what we're talking about right now in terms of just being able to alleviate some sentences and allow people to not be penalized for marijuana, when people making money off of marijuana. Why are we still criminalizing people for marijuana? It's crazy. So that's just a few of the things I would start with.
I love that you brought up clemency, because I think in this space, we always think in terms of legislative advocacy and changing the laws and updating the laws in the books, but our governors wield an enormous amount of power just by the use of their executive pen. And we've seen some of that across the country amidst the COVID-19 health pandemic, and trying to get people out of jails, to take them out of harm's way. And I have to note, unfortunately, we have not seen that in Mississippi. Our governor would not use his executive authority to release the elderly who are locked up, who are at incredible risk. We know prisons are hotbeds to spread these types of infections and diseases. And so we have an aging population here in the state of Mississippi due to like how egregiously we sentence people in the state. You were talking about someone having 45 years, taking some hedge clippers, we'll give you 20 years for taking tools out of a garage shed, right? It's like the way we use our habitual sentencing enhancements. You can serve de facto life for something super minor. And you mentioned like decriminalizing marijuana. I'll note that in Oklahoma, they reclassified their drug crimes. And so earlier this year in Oklahoma, we saw the largest commutation in U.S. history when they changed those laws on how they categorize drug crimes. So I think that's huge. And I'm hoping to see other states, including us here in Mississippi, follow suit soon. That would be really exciting to see. So I wouldn't think of that, and I think that's a mistake we make often, thinking through legislative advocacy. But we really gotta lobby our governors.
We gotta think. We're so used to being big about it and overthinking it sometimes. And we have the power just within our city councils for that, within our legislation, our governors within our states, and not necessarily have to wait for the tug and pull at the federal level. We can do that in just some of our policies, in the way we do things locally. So,
absolutely.
And one example of that, Marissa, is when I came into office, one of the first things I did, and that's why this question is so hard to answer, because it's, to me, it's systemic. Even when you even talk about immediate needs, the first thing that we did was ban the box. If a person, can't secure gainful employment, my God, that's when the survival instincts have to kick in, right? And so, that's an example of why it's a pretty tough question. But you're right, though. There are some things that we can do on the local level, but because most of the crimes like drug offenses in Mississippi are felonious, it gets out of our hands at the local level, right? We can ban the box. We can decriminalize small amounts of marijuana up to what the state statute will allow us to do, right? And we don't do that. And here in my city, another thing that we did away with the debtor's prison. We don't even lock people up where they have to make bail, unless, of course, we have to detain them for DUI or domestic violence, for 24 hours or so. But those things, however limited, they are impactful. I have formerly incarcerated individuals who are working with the city of Magnolia, right? And that helps them, because I've heard their stories of how long it took them to even secure employment after incarceration, to be able to provide for themselves and their families. So those are some of the things that we could do on the local level. However, that's why the policy reform is so important, though, at the state level, because once it becomes a felonious crime, right, or charge rather, then it's completely out of our hands.
Yeah, and Mayor Witherspoon, you mentioned two really good things that you did at the local level with your municipality. And in case our viewers don't know what you're talking about, could you go and give us brief explanations of what you mean when you say ban the box in debtors' prisons?
Yeah, so ban the box is an initiative that can be started at the local level, like Marissa was suggesting, that we start some things at the local level where it actually removes the question from the employment application of, have you ever been convicted of a felony or a crime, right? What it does is it bars people on the front end from even having a serious chance of gaining employment or moving to the interview phase of the application process. So we know that creates a barrier to gainful employment. So we immediately remove that from our application. And again, like I say, we have people who are formerly incarcerated or returning citizens or whatever labels they want to give us these days, right? They're working for the city and they're providing for themselves and their family. In fact, my wife is also a state senator, and she introduced a bill to actually ban the box on all statewide applications. And to show you why we need moral imperative around criminal justice reform, those folks found a way to kill that bill at the state level. We're dealing with a supermajority Republican Party in the House and in the Senate and in the governor's mansion and the lieutenant governor's office. So, you know, something as simple as, you know, allowing people to have a real opportunity to have gainful employment to provide for themselves and their families, the Republicans of Mississippi said no. They said no. So they did not ban the box. Of course, debtor's prison is where you have just what I keep referring to Marissa because you're bringing up the points. When you have people sitting in jail on bonds for jaywalking, you know, or some minor possession of marijuana, and they can't make it because of their living in poverty-stricken areas, with low-income areas, and as a result of it, end up losing their jobs and making a bad situation worse, right? So another thing that we did, we struck down the need for anyone outside of a DUI, where we have to detain people and get them off the street for public safety, right? Or domestic violence or any type of violent crime, where we have to hold people overnight. But otherwise, we really have pretty much shut down our jail here in the city of Magnolia, and no bond is required upon arrest.
That's awesome to hear. Thank you so much for expounding upon that. Next, I'm going to turn back to you, Marissa. We have, as a nation, we've witnessed people successfully avoid prosecution because of different state stand your ground laws. And in some instances, the case was prosecuted, but the accused was found not guilty, most notably the Trayvon Martin case. But unfortunately, that did not happen in your case. So just after all this time has passed and given your lived experience, what do you think was so different about your case?
I'm sorry, what was the last part of that?
What do you think was so different about your case? Why do you think in other instances, when the case is even brought to prosecution, the accused is not found guilty? But in your instance, where it was definitely what some would call a textbook case for self-defense, why it wasn't seen that way and why you were actually sentenced to serve prison time?
Yeah, I think that it was a number of things, but one of the things to consider is who shows up at the scene of the actual incident. Okay. Because in those incidents, that's where the law enforcement makes the decision at that point whether or not they feel that those instances are in fact, meet the stand your ground, law. I think the other thing is obviously the persons. I think we're dealing with narratives and implicit biases and just pure prejudices as well. Of course, it was to consider me to be angry Black woman. So of course she had to have done that. And anybody else's, their fear is a lot more real than anybody else's, especially if they don't look like me. The other thing was I actually went through a stand your ground hearing. I had to petition a judge for a motion to actually apply for it. They had to look at it and say, okay, we'll grant you the hearing. And then from there, I actually had the actual stand your ground hearing. A lot of these times, what happens in some of these other cases, they don't necessarily go forward with a stand your ground hearing, because what it does is it pretty much gives your defense over ahead of time. Mm-hmm. So in fact, if you do lose that stand your ground, like I did, you pretty much handed over your entire defense to the state. So it's really, it's not advantageous to the defendant to do so, which is why a lot of them, especially if the defendant is, especially if the victim has been killed, then they proceed with going to trial where they don't have to say anything. because then it's their word against theirs. So it's just a lot of little different technical things that a lot of people don't know about. But more importantly, it was what it looks like to me is it's just really a bill to justify being able to kill someone and not be able to be held accountable in some respects, especially when they decide what they're going to look into when they go on a scene. And just think about any other case, right? There's a time that happens within that 48 hours where there's evidence that needs to be collected. So you mean to tell me you can make that at that time with all the evidence that would need to be collected in order for you to make that decision, i.e. Trayvon Martin? So we didn't know that he was following him, was told he wasn't supposed to, but you had already been given the benefit of the doubt, right? So these are things that as we see they work themselves out, a lot of people don't know. And I think it's designed for who it's designed for. And because it's not equally applied, for one. Two, I think the people and the officers, including the judges and even some attorneys, are not familiar with stand your ground, the rules around it, that it's an expansion of self-defense, when to use it, when to not, how to try it. I just don't think that they have that level of expertise to be able to do it, which is all another reason why it doesn't need to be done or decided at a scene in and of itself. But, that's just my take on it.
Wow, yeah, and those are some things I haven't even considered. I mean, you hear about these cases so much. We, read about it online. We see it on the news. And this isn't the stuff like that people are telling you. Particularly like the way you outline it. So I definitely think it's important to speak on those issues. Dr. Witherspoon, I'm going to move to you next, and Marissa, you can chime in on this as well. But I'm going to use Dr. Witherspoon thinking of the life after. One of the things we hear about in this world is just the barriers in the way to kind of starting your life, or there are so many barriers: housing, employment. Dr. Witherspoon, we were talking about ban the box and some of those other issues, but post your incarceration, you've achieved all levels of education, from your bachelor's to your master's and to a PhD, and you're the mayor of a town in Mississippi. So what kind of words of advice, encouragement, what would you say to naysayers? You were speaking of the backlash we got here from the state legislature when it comes to giving people another chance. Again, we're talking about a moral imperative, and why it's important to not give on people. So just based on your own lived experiences, how would you, what would you say to people who feel like it's impossible to build your life back? And the second part of that is what would you say to skeptics who think, once you've been accused of something malicious, that all hope is lost for you?
Yeah. So, Alesha, first, I think it'll make sense to really just point out who the skeptics are, and really determine whether they're really skeptics. I don't think they're skeptics. I think they know what would happen if they give people the same privilege that they enjoy in life, right? I think the reality of it is that we just a class and race war in the United States. And these are not skeptics. These are people who know exactly what they're doing. They know that if these rights were given and these privileges were given to people like me, that we have a chance to compete and actually exceed their expectations, right? And that's what it really just boils down to. I'm like the type of guy that like to call a spade, right? Because we can't fight what we can't see, and I don't want to put no lipstick on this pig, right? They know exactly what the hell they're doing, right? And so we have to fight with that type of tenacity, right? We have to see the people who, when we come up with white papers and all the data suggesting that what you're doing is counterproductive to the state's economy and counterproductive to public safety, and all of that falls on deaf ears, then you just got to call it what it is, and you have to then say, you know what, we have to mobilize our people, the people who are directly impacted by this, because basically what we are in is a race and class war, and the criminal justice system is being used as a tool to lock us down, right? And that's the way I see it, and that's the way I approach it. I know that most of the folks in the state legislators are very intelligent people. They come from very prestigious universities. They could read these white papers and they know exactly what we're talking about when we talk about, the impact that over incarceration is having on the state's economy and the burden on the taxpayers. But I guess some people say some things are worth paying for, right? It's basically what it boils down to, whatever you prioritize with your taxes, right? Some people see over incarceration as an investment, right? Yeah. So I think once we as advocates, right, start calling a spade, we'll start approaching it the right way, right? Yeah.
And the other parts of that question is like, what advice would you give to those like behind you on just rebuilding your life and getting back on good footing? Like, what kinds of encouragement would you offer?
Well, in prison, they want to make sure they reduce you to a number, right? And mine was inmate 63202, right? And so it's not about what they call you. It's about what you call yourself. It's about what God see in you. They saw 63202. My higher power, and it starts with me, right? And how I saw myself, right? I had to see myself. I didn't accidentally become a mayor or a doctor or a husband and a father, and a successful businessman, right? So I would encourage them to not let other people define who they are, because if you do, they're going to reduce you to inmate 63202, right? And they're going to put all kind of labels on you coming out of the system. In fact, you don't let it start once you get outside. You start on the inside, and start utilizing this time. As you utilize that time to fight for your freedom, you also utilize that time to invest in yourself while you're inside. And so I can say that was one of the things that helped me personally, was take advantage of that time while I was actually fighting the system. I was also investing in myself by taking advantage of the libraries there and preparing myself to be a more productive person than I was prior to incarceration.
Great. Marissa, did you want to add anything to that?
I think he said a lot about, he was speaking about it being, race and class and, issue. And also we need to understand we can't legislate morality, right? We still trying to do that. It's not working for us. And so it begs the question, how do you reform that?
Right.
Seriously. Like, how do you reform that, right? So then you have to figure out ways to legislate the things that are complicit in it and profit off of it. And that's the other part of that, because there's so much profit in imprisoning and harming people. And then we say to people, don't harm people and then we're going to penalize you. But the system is designed to do that, right? So as long as we have that as long as we have that as what we use to kind of govern our society, I find it very difficult to be able to reform something where there's so much money being made off of it. There's so much profit being made off of that.
Yeah.
And I think that, like he said, it absolutely is a race thing, because let's just say this. If in fact the system that was being built or is in place was actually being done to the white nation, everything that you could think of to get them out of it and rehabilitate and cause, any other programs or anything else will work. Give you an example, the opioid crisis, see how that manifested.
Right.
So, you think about them knowing what could be done. Like you said, they read white papers, they know. You know what I mean? They know what's being done, but the powers that be are the people that make money off of these, are the people that make the decisions. However, there's a small amount of people, because there's more people we really have more of the impact. These are just people that are supposed to represent us. But I really feel like the people have the power. And I think there would be it would go a long way for the people to know just how much power they have, because these people are making decisions on our individual behalf, but the people that are really suffering at the hands of it are obviously outweigh the people who are making those decisions. But I just think that profit is profit over people, and that's where we are. And then the other thing about just kind of how you build yourself back up, I think for me, what was important, I had an education before I went in. And so one of the things that always stuck with me, and my great grandmother told me this when we were young, which was to make sure we get an education, not so much so we could progress but because once you knew that it wasn't anything they could do to take what you already have in your head. So while I was locked up, I already knew exactly who I was. I was grateful and fortunate enough to have a situation where, God has sent me an army, and I was able to give back 50 something years, because she was trying to give me 60 after the first time. So I was sentenced to 20. And then once my appeal was granted, she was trying to give me 60. And so for me, just being able to know that, that my DC number didn't define me. And I was grateful to know that. I was very interested in learning while I was there, like he also mentioned, and just being able to prepare myself that when I did come out, I would make a pivot in the career choices, because my background is IT, and then I have a master's in business. And so, coming back and out and having to kind of stay within the area that, people really kind of know my case and know who I am, it makes it a little bit more difficult to be able to, go back into what I was doing before, which was corporate America and things like that. So, but with this perspective, though, it also allowed for me to be able to look at things from like a bird's eye view. So the way I think about things and the things I advocate for and how I choose to approach it has everything to do with me being able to have that formidable that education prior to going in. And so I was able to just try to make that experience and see how I would move afterwards. But there's so many people that do so well once they come out. They get it from the mud. Some of them, they're super hustlers and entrepreneurs. They do really well in business. And like he said, as long as you establish that you are not your number, that because they do try to reduce you down to a number and beat you down. But if you reject that, and you pour into yourself and you seek those opportunities and get a hold of, relationships and avenues that help people who are formerly incarcerated, a lot of people do really, really well. And I think that we could spend a lot more money. And since we spend money to lock people up, if we're going to reduce it, we could take that money to educate people and give them skills-based things. Because not everybody wants to go to school for a year. Some people don't, some people just want to specifically train in this trade. You know what I mean? They don't necessarily want to do that. And I think those opportunities need to be, available. I know in San Quentin, they had a whole pretty much like a college running there. People were writing programming, I think Curtis Wall Street, how to, he trade penny stock, and this is what's sitting behind a wall. You know what I mean? So it's definitely, you give them the tools and things necessary when they come home, they absolutely can excel.
Yeah, and so actually, I'm not sure if we have questions. We're down to the last 15 minutes, so I definitely want to make sure we give our audience the opportunity to ask questions of our panelists, so you can start sharing those. And I'll ask one final question. You both touched on something really important, and Marissa, you framed it as kind of profit over people, and that's what we're talking about, a more imperative. And I think you're both right. Like when we're dealing with lawmakers and legislators, like I think we know what we're dealing with. But it's been my experience in advocacy that we still have a lot of educating to do in like just on the community level. So people see what you've experienced, what I've learned in my work. So what do you think? What are your solutions? What does that type of education look like? How do we kind of show the people who have not been touched or impacted what you know to be true?
For me?
Yeah, you go first, yeah.
Ladies first.
Well, I think one of the things that could use some more education, I say this all the time to people. I'm like, and not that people want to use their quote unquote circumstances as an excuse, but people have to understand it has a lot to do with the reason why people learn the things they learn in their environments. Things happen to them earlier in their life, opportunities, all kinds of traumas that take place. And that, sometimes has a way of shifting the trajectory of a person's entire life. And I think it's because it's like this notion that people are born and just like, hey, I came out and at 2, I was like, you know what? When I get 17, I'm going to be doing some carjacking. It just don't happen like that, right? It's like it doesn't. And people having to understand, like, where in your life did something take place? And that changed the trajectory. And I think that those are some of the conversations that we don't get to have because we have a media set up to kind of interject into our thinking what it looks like and what is taking place, when in fact that's completely the opposite. And understanding that if you just reduce the quote unquote crime down to just really being people that being oppressed and food apartheid, and not having banks in their communities, not having food stores in their communities, and how that just manifests, family members being taken away and murdered, fathers and mothers not being in the home, violence prevalent, and how that shapes a person's shapes the outcome in their life. Not always the case, because obviously we have people that come out of that, but those people that come out of that, what did it take to get them there? And then why can't we replicate that to some degree? We just spend a lot of time penalizing people's trauma. And we don't get the opportunities to really talk about restorative justice as an avenue, or transformative justice as an avenue for really being able to work through those issues that take place at the core level that changes people's lives and then changes the trajectory. And I think those are things as an alternative to incarceration that we can definitely start talking about, because we do know a lot of that takes place, and that for some reason, not for some reason, but for obvious reasons, really stagnates people's ability to really move. And it breaks people, it breaks their consciousness, it breaks their psycho-spiritual. And then people are like, you know what? I'm just gonna have to get it how I live. And it's just a cycle, So I just think we could do, better with that.
Wow. Mayor Witherspoon.
Yeah, I think we, especially from my position, I think we have to use our authority to set examples. For instance, the young men who work for the city, who are formerly incarcerated, they're not a statistic as it relates to recidivism. You see, those young men have been working for the city now for years. They've been here as long as I have. I've been mayor for nearly 7 years in the city, and I think I have to use my story myself, as an example. Of if someone has the same privilege and opportunities as everyone else, then they pretty much will behave and become a similar statistic, which is a successful statistic. You don't have a whole lot of people robbing banks who are gainfully employed, right? And living in nice neighborhoods and driving nice vehicles and able to provide for their family, right? So we have to, some of the people who actually doing all the complaining and skeptics, a lot of the time they're in a position to help change that reality, right? A lot of these people are managers and things of that sort, right? So I have to share, the evidence-based, this evidence-based research that we're creating here in the city of Magnolia by, not just allowing, I have to admit that I give preference, right, to those who are formerly incarcerated, to be honest. And the reason why I can say that unapologetically is because other people have, more opportunity and chances to get gainful employment than those who have a criminal record. So I feel compelled, right, to make sure that my administration know that there is going to be preference given to those who are formerly incarcerated. and they should look at it. I make sure that they understand that there's a lot of benefits for the city for that, right? Because this is to be smart on public safety as well, right? To not only did we man the box, but we also recognize annually reentry month. The board passed legislation, resolution, and we support successful reentry. Here in the county, with the neighboring cities, we also used to run a reentry program, right, that had housing available, food, clothing, pantry, and just peer-to-peer mentoring, and also assisting people with job placement. So, we have to utilize we have to take our influence and make these examples and tell the stories, not just as a narrative, be able to point to the realities of how giving a person a chance change their lives. And for those who don't believe that they can be impacted by one story I don't tell people is that when I was 19 years old, I was facing 120 years in prison for mistaken identity, as they call it, in Florida. Yeah, I was picked up and charged with 7 counts of armed robbery. In fact, I'm sorry, that was 140 years that I was facing. Right there in Kissimmee, Florida. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I was black. And that was the only thing I did wrong, right? And so I looked like the other black men that was 20 years old, right? And going in that walked into a convenience store on the regular, right? And I found myself facing 7 counts of armed robbery and 140 years in prison, 20 years maximum per count. And I sat in jail for 3 weeks. The robberies continued. They finally found the guy who was actually doing the robberies. They gave me my stuff back that I came in with, and just, simply said, see you later. That was it, right? So, I think some people think that they're insulated, from those type of things happening. But I think Professor Lewis Gates will beg to differ, right? It doesn't matter what you have achieved in life. I'm the mayor of a city, right? Over a police department now. Same police cars I used to ride in, I signed the checks to buy them now, right? Same police chief I used to run from, I appoint them now. Same judge I stood before, 30 years ago, appoint that judge now. But when I leave out of the city of Magnolia, my black behind could end up back behind bars because of racial profile. And I understand that. And I hope our people start understanding that too.
All right, and so I just feel like in these spaces it can get so heavy. You both have educated myself, and I'm sure our audience greatly this afternoon, and we're down to the last couple minutes. So what I want to give you the opportunity is to just leave our audience with some words of hope and encouragement. 2020 has been a trying year for us all, right? Just across the spectrum, but it's a huge election year. We can't escape the horrors of like the protests that are happening across the nation. We have literal cities that are on fire, depending on where you live. We are continuing to see Black bodies murdered at the hands of white police, and no accountability for it. And I've heard and I've seen like my peers, friends, family, people just kind of reach this place of what's the point? Why are we here? Like, why do we keep fighting? Why do we keep having, Black leadership summits? What's the point? So as our closing, I would love to hear from both of you just the answer to that. Like, how do we instill a sense of hope and encourage people to just not give up? Marissa, we'll start with you.
Okay. Yeah, I am very... I am very much a candidate of not living in fear. I mean, I know that it's difficult, and being a Black woman with 2 Black daughters and a Black son, and I just refuse to live in fear. I believe that this is an opportunity, is as difficult as it has been. It's really been a time of reckoning. And so to some degree, it's almost just kind of understanding just basic laws. And sometimes you have to destroy before you elevate. I know that from a historical standpoint, America is a very young country, but this is not any different than what other countries or others, countries have been through in terms of just that turning point in their democracy, if they did in fact have one at one point. But just this change and this shift is taking place. And then the question is, then becomes, we now have to figure out how do we want to deal with race. You know what I mean? Because really at the center of all this is it's about race, and it's always been about race and a globalization of quote unquote white supremacy everywhere. Right. And so just being able to understand what do we want it to look like, because I can't live in fear and then dream and reimagine what it's going to look like for my children and the children's children and my neighbors' children and my community's children. So what is it that I can be a part of? I think it's important for people to kind of really look at the things that they feel like, I want to get involved with that because this sits with me, or I want to get involved with that because this is close to me, or I might want to get involved with that because this was at my front door. And then, encouraging people about ways to be able to do that, because there's a whole lot going on and you cannot be involved in everything.
Right.
Drive you crazy. It's overwhelming. And so what we do is I think it's important to really amplify each other's work too, because there's a lot of good organizations that have been doing this for so long and they have an agenda about this and all this information, but it's not really making it to the masses. Now the people in the community know about it. The people who are doing the work know about it. The advocates that know about it. Scholars who talk about it all the time know about it. But what about the people in the community who are, concerned about football, basketball, and Cardi B, which is fine. I'm just saying you can, chew gum and walk at the same time. You know what I mean? Just being able to have a little balance there. Yeah. And that's kind of important, because I think that now it's, in a way it's forcing us to look at things that we probably were, very comfortable with. And I think it's also important to understand this idea of perfection. It doesn't exist. It's a lot of criminal activity that hasn't been caught. You know what I mean? And everybody's really just trying to do the best that they can, but we have opportunities. We also have seen, a lot of states change leadership. We've seen so many Black women leaders running for Senate positions and Congress, and I'm excited, and I believe that is what it's going to take. People who are necessarily in the trenches, who are going forward and being like, no, because I didn't like the way this all came out. So this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to get in a position where I have decision-making power and I'm going to make that influence. And I think we're starting to see a whole lot more of that. Not necessarily really, I see entertainers are getting involved to some degree, but I also think that's been interesting as well, because it sparks a conversation about what he mentioned about class, and how they see the world and how they envision the world. And everybody's kind of like, well, hold up. This ain't kind of what's really going on down here in the trenches, but these are all conversations that need to be had, right? And so I just think that it's very important. And I think for me, one of the things I really advocate about is just our relationships within our communities, between our brothers and our sisters. Because even when we're going through all of this, if we are not being able to handle conflict, if we're not being able to support one another, how are we going to continue to maintain and address this fear? These are things that are very, very important. And I also believe that the church is going to have to do a better role than what they've been doing, especially in my communities. It can't necessarily be a separation. These people, come and congregate at your facilities. We have to be able to make sure we all get involved, just to some degree, kind of like what it did in the civil rights movement, when everybody was on hands on deck. We can't, decide, well, I'm good over here and I can't, I'm good, so I'm not going to participate. We all have to have a collective participation in the things that happens. And you got to just give a damn about other people other than yourself. Right. You know what I mean? Like, you're just going to have to. I can't say that I wasn't necessarily one of those people who knew what was going on to the degree. And so now just being able to be in, spaces where I can speak to people who wouldn't ordinarily go to other places. And then you got to meet people where they are. Yeah. We have to meet people where we are. And there are specific people who are really good at doing that. And let's support them people. And let's not get mad because they're not supporting that issue too. That's not their lane. Yeah. What I mean? And so, I'm all for being a chief and being an Indian and going between those roles. because I'm really happy about the collective. I'm really, I'm grateful for what the collective can do. I'm grateful for what our next generations can do, and how technology plays a part in that as well. So, that's kind of how I see it.
Thank you so much, Mayor Dr. Anthony Witherspoon. In 2 minutes or less, can you give the people some words of encouragement in what's been a very trying year?
Yeah, so I just want to encourage people to know that right before the break of dawn is the darkest minutes of night, the darkest and the coldest, right? So what we're seeing are dark and cold hours, but what we also seeing already with turnout, in early voting is the break of dawn, right? And what we saw all over the country as a result, unfortunately, as a result of police brutality and murders, we saw organizing across this country like we've never seen it before. So I think that collective and that collective conscious is growing, and with that being said, positive change is just around the corner.
Awesome. Well, a huge thanks to you both for taking the time to come and hang and chat with us today. This has been an incredible conversation, and I'm so glad I got to do it with you both. I know we had some technical difficulties getting started, but I think it all worked out the way it was supposed to. So a huge thanks to you both. This was awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you.